Thanks for sharing part of your day with us here on the TD Ameritrade Network. I mentioned the overall general consensus is that the Fed's going to leave rates unchanged today. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and the up-to-date, literally up-to-minute CME FedWatch tool has only a 24% chance that the Fed's going to move today. However, going out to July, 64% chance of a quarter rate cut, Ben, and an 18% chance of a 50 basis point cut. Now, I don't really see that happening. I don't think there's any reason for the Fed to move today. I don't think at this point there's any reason for the Fed to move next month either.
Scott, talk to me, because this week we've talked a lot about how a cut today would shock the market, but it seems the Fed it's got to be very careful on many levels in terms of potentially shocking the market today. This is probably going to be one of the more closely watched meetings, and especially the question and answer session, possibly the most closely watched we've seen all year.
Yeah, no doubt. It seems like it's like that every time, right? But this one certainly is. And you know, at the Q&A session, not only do you have what is the language moving forward, which everyone is so closely really just eyeing in on, and is the language going to be, well, we really have to be more accommodative, this, that, and the other. But I'm sure Jerome Powell is going to feed many questions which he won't answer about what is your relationship with President Trump? How do you feel about President Trump saying, well, we might want to remove him? I'm sure that he will get asked those questions. There's no chance he will address them.
How about rates, Scott? Falling like a stone, but for the most part, the dollar is really yet to take notice, and it's really yet to come off. I mean, ultimately, you and I have talked multiple times about how this sort of points us or directs us back to some of the weakness we've been seeing in the euro and the British pound, the New Zealand dollar, the Aussie dollar as well. But this really kind of has you taking a step back and kind of scratching your head. I mean, rates into a new low yesterday, the dollar barely bat an eye.
Yep. Well, I think that really lends itself to looking at the overall market and saying the overall market is confused on where rates are and where rates should be, because we don't typically see this kind of trade, this kind of divergence, which is going on in the market right now.
Scott, do you think we'll get some clarification in terms of that from some of the comments today from the Fed chair, or are we just going to continue to see speculation as we head into July and potentially kick the can down the road? I mean, ultimately, if the Fed doesn't act today, then that's kind of what we're setting up for in many ways. It's just continued, again, uncertainty in terms of when they will, or if they will, I should say.
Right, no question about it. I don't think there's going to be anything definitive other than to, Powell to say, listen, we are going to continue to monitor the economic environment. Yeah. We're going to continue to monitor what's going on with China, and we'll see how that impacts us. I don't think they can lay out any sort of plan with any sort of certainty whatsoever, other than to say, listen, we will be ready to act if necessary.
Yeah, let's talk about someone else who's having a hard time laying out any plan with any type of certainty. As you mentioned, the Fed is Draghi and the ECB. Comments yesterday sent the euro currency sharply lower. The central bank president spoke of how additional stimulus will be required and how the ECB will answer any challenges to price stability in the future. To that, many argue, forget about trying to manage the future instabilities. How about focusing on those in the present in some form of easing? Or at this point, is it inevitable right now, Scott, for the ECB that we're going to get a rate cut, or we will get some sort of stimulus, some sort of easing?
100%, 99%. If there's nothing that's a certainty. For the last 6 to 9 months, every time we've seen an ECB rate decision and every time we've seen Mario Draghi speak, he's been kicking the can down the road in terms of when they might actually raise rates. It was supposed to be first this spring. Then it was supposed to be this summer. Then it got to, well, we'll see by the end of 2019. Now it's a complete, not flip-flop, but it's a complete turn of events as to, wow, we need to potentially cut rates. I think it's all but a certainty that's going to happen.
Yeah, Scott, it's interesting because for the most part, without them really kind of owning up to, or at least stating the obvious, I mean, it kind of loses or it discredits their credibility for the most part. I mean, it just kind of lessens some of the expectations or some of the real focus on their statement.
I completely agree with you. And the longer this drags on, much like Brexit, the longer this drags on, the less important the every news cycle begins to be. The less important what he actually says really impacting the marketplace. And people at some point just kind of get numb to it and just start to take their own opinions. And what Draghi says now, okay, you take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and we can become numb to it. But Scott, you can also understand why. I mean, they're in a very difficult position. I mean, tough to initiate policy decisions with all the uncertainty tied to Brexit. Recent EU elections and the economic data, for the most part, speaks for itself. Certainly hasn't helped their efforts any. We took a look at some of the inflation numbers overnight out of the UK, and while they were pretty much in line with expectations, nothing in terms of anything to be concerned about.
No, I agree with that. But if you take a look at the economic numbers in sum over the last 6 to 9 months, pretty dismal.
Yeah.
Very dismal.
Yeah.
Everything is slowing down. Inflation expectations that they have right now are probably nowhere in the realm of being met. And this is not new news. This is not something that just happened overnight. This has been a continuation probably since, third or fourth quarter of 2018. And for them to finally, or Draghi to finally come out and maybe state, all right, we're not just looking at potentially raising rates, we're actually, in the place right now where we may need to lower rates, that should have been done 3 or 6 months ago.